As many of you know, we filmed this episode of the Flipside on Veterans Day 2015, and we decided to dedicate the show to issues surrounding veterans in America today. But first, a little history. Fred, what's the origin of the holiday we now call Veterans Day?
Well, thank you. Great question. All right, it goes way back, even before my time, and I think even before your time.
Barely.
Clear back in like 1918, I believe it was, right after World War I, when all the hostilities were over, and when they signed the peace accord and everything, and it happened to be November 11th at 11 a.m., and November the 11th month. And they called it Armistice Day. And so it started a tradition of recognizing and honoring all veterans.
Right.
And then, as of course, as like everything, as it evolved, our government got involved, and it kind of took on a little track of its own, if you will, until after, because they thought World War I was the end of all world wars, and there wasn't going to be any more, so it could stay Armistice Day just for that, because of that World War I. And of course, World War II came along.
Yeah, I mean, who knew? Absolutely. Ed, what'd your parents call that day? I mean, did they call it Armistice Day, or did they call it?
Well, it was Armistice Day is what it was called, but I was, in 1954, Eisenhower signed the bill that changed it to Veterans Day, and that was due to the fact that there was approximately 16 million folks that were involved in fought in World War II. Another 5,400 were in Korea. And so after the end of the Korean War, which I think ended in '53, my dad was in World War II in the Army,
right,
and in Korea in the Navy.
Right.
So I remember it as Veterans Day because it had been changed at that point. But I do remember them speaking about that it had been referred to as Armistice Day prior to that.
How about your bunch, Carl?
Just always Veterans Day.
Always Veterans Day. Okay, that's interesting, because I know where I grew up in southern West Virginia, that my parents referred to it even up into the 60s as Armistice Day. I mean, that was...
I grew up in Wyoming, and as did I. Of course, in '54, I was probably my first year in college, I guess, in '54, it seems like. But it was Armistice Day for a long time after that. It just did not connect to all of us.
Well, of course, I'm sorry, but that was a different day in our household as well, November 11th. Because that's my mother's birthday.
You told me that.
Yeah. So we had every November the 11th, every Veterans Day, if you will, or Armistice Day was my mother's birthday. So that was a big, it was a double celebration.
Right. Yeah. Well, did your mom and dad sign an armistice every November the 11th? I mean, so
well,
they get along.
If they did, I wasn't a witness to it.
I got you. Well, here's a little bit of extra trivia on Armistice Day. In 1945, after cessation of hostilities in World War II, a fellow by the name of Fred Weeks, who lived, interestingly enough, in Birmingham, Alabama, took a petition to, at the time, General Dwight Eisenhower, and said, this thing about revering our veterans from World War I only, as Fred pointed out, we've just had World War II. We need to have a day of remembrance for all veterans from all wars up to that time. Well, Eisenhower picked up on that and really loved it and loved the idea. And then when he was president in 1954, one of you mentioned, in 1954, he signed legislation that created what we now know as Veterans Day on the 11th of November of each year.
And what was great, though, they made it a national holiday clear back in 1938.
Sure.
And, of course, our government being government, and I'm certainly not anti-government, not after 36 years serving in the government.
Federal holiday.
But a federal holiday, very good. Then they wanted to change it. They wanted to move it from November 11th, the celebration of, the recognition of, from November 11th to a Monday.
Yeah, sure.
A Monday. Yeah. And then finally, after several years, they finally woke up and, they went back. Congress reversed itself, which is hard to believe that they did that, but they reversed themselves, and now it falls on the day as it's supposed to, as I wish Memorial Day did.
Well, like it used to, on the 30th of May every year, right?
Sure.
Right.
That was what it was.
Now, back in the beginning in 1918, when this first started, wasn't there like a pause on the 11th day of November at the 11th hour where everybody stopped what they were doing, and for a couple of minutes they
2 minutes of silence. You're
2 minutes of silence.
You're exactly
okay,
right.
2 minutes of silence.
Yeah, that's
That's
exactly
sort of how it began.
Sure.
Everything just came to a stop at 11 a.m.
The first one to sort of the presidents was Woodrow Wilson in 1919. Actually, is the one, if you will, who started Armistice Day.
Right.
And part of the ceremony was across the nation this 2-minute pause when you were supposed to reflect on things that were going on.
And of course, on Wyoming, we didn't get those messages. We didn't have social media then. Smoke signals.
I was going to say,
The Pony Express was
was-
really going.
Was there anybody living in Wyoming in 1918?
just Fred.
Just Fred? Just Fred?
Just Fred.
Yeah, just me.
There's sort of an issue going around, and we were talking about it before we started filming this particular segment. There's an issue going around talking about Veterans Day of should we honor more than just our veterans? For example, should we honor maybe the New York Police and Fire Department folks that were killed in 2001 with the World Trade Center? In other words, should first responders be a part of our commemoration of veterans? Carl?
You know, being a certified emergency manager that I am, I'm particularly sensitive to first responders. I've seen them in action in so many different disasters. But while they deserve a tremendous amount of respect and honor, if we're going to have a separate day for them, I would definitely support that.
Right.
Most take our Firemen's Memorial Day and perhaps make that a national holiday. I'd be completely for that. But I don't think we need to mix that with the military. We've been doing far too much of that anymore. It's a mindset now. The military is no longer just the military. The military is anything that has anything to do with fighting terrorism, and of course first responders play a large part in that. So we're mixing all these together in a national mindset. We don't need to do that. The military has an entirely different function, although it's been misused lately. Let the military be the military, let responders be responders, and pay each the respect that they're due. And responders most certainly do a tremendous amount of respect.
And I couldn't agree with you more on that, Carl. Thank you for bringing that up, and especially in your position and what you do. This started back in 1918. I'm talking about Veterans Day, and for a purpose for veterans.
Yeah.
And I don't think it should be convoluted into a mixture of what's next after first responders. And I'm certainly not picking on those guys by any stretch of the imagination. But I am saying, though, that it's Veterans Day. Let's leave it at that, and let's have a separate day. September 11th, based on just the
That'd be a
magnitude
great
of it,
pick for it.
would be, I think, a great day. Even though there's some observation already on September 11th, happens to be my birthday. That's not the observation I'm referring to. But I think that would be an ideal day just because of the number of.
Now, would
responders.
September 11th always fall on a Monday?
I bet you Congress wished that.
If we were to do that, but I think that's a great idea.
Ed, what's your take?
Well, I like that date. I think Fred just hit the nail on the head. I think September the 11th. I don't want to mix them either. I think they would dilute down the celebration of the military. And besides that, as you pointed out, it all sort of began at the 11th hour on November the 11th in 1918 with President Wilson, and I think that should be left alone. But let's look at a separate day for first responders. They put themselves in harm's way continually every day. They get up every day and they don't know if they're coming home that evening.
Well, not to change your minds. I think I'm outvoted at the table because I happen to revel in that thought because I look at 9/11 as an undeclared war, and I look at those first responders that went into that building. Those buildings up in
As
New York
military.
City. Yeah, they're certainly veterans of something, veterans of a non-declared war. But remember also, in the beginning in 1918, the observance of Armistice Day was an observance of those who died in World War I. Now that has evolved ultimately in 1954 to all veterans who served. But the initial action to have a day of remembrance about World War I was to remember those who died. And of course, we now have split that to where Memorial Day is where we remember those who died in wars and Veterans Day as we remember those who serve. So anyway, I don't want to change anybody's opinion.
And you didn't.
Okay,
I
I'm still.
on something different for the flip side.
I'm still.
Wouldn't you like another holiday?
Yeah, well.
On a Monday?
Not really.
What about these
I'm
economic impacts
retired.
of all this, right?
Sure, absolutely. Well, listen, I'm going to take the last word on that and say I still vote for